Reverend Dr. Neal Jones. He's a colleague and friend of mine. He's also a psychologist at the Pisgah Institute in Asheville. Born and raised in North Carolina, he earned his BA from Wake Forest University, his MDiv from Southeastern Seminary, and his PsyD from Baylor University. He has served as a minister of 5 congregations in North and South Carolina, Texas, and Pennsylvania, and most recently at the Mainline Unitarian Church near Philly and the UU congregation in Columbia, South Carolina. He also serves as the chair of the National Board of Trustees for the Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Reverend Dr. Jones teaches and practices a spirituality of personal wholeness, relational respect, and social justice. His sermon will cover the insurrection on our capital on January 6th. It was a graphic reminder of the fragility of democracy, even American democracy. But the threat runs deeper than politics and theology. He sees that it's spiritual. It's the inability to put the common good before self-interests.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, UUs of Newark, for having me as your guest. I look forward to worshiping with you today. Our opening words come from historian Howard Zinn, who wrote a people's history of the United States. He writes, "To be hopeful in bad times is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. But if we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of a world in a different direction." If the insurrection at our nation's capital on January 6th accomplished anything, it vividly reminded us of the fragility of democracy. Now, we had been warned at the beginning by one of our founders, who also happens to be a Unitarian. In addition to being a leader of the revolution, our first vice president and our second president, John Adams was also a student of history. Though he helped to establish our American democracy, his reading of history had taught him the precariousness of democracy. Remember, he warned his compatriots, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. It is vain to say that democracy is less vain, less proud, less selfish, less ambitious, or less avaricious than aristocracy or monarchy. It is not true, in fact, and nowhere appears in history. Those passions are the same in all persons under all forms of government, and when unchecked, produce the same effects of fraud, violence, and cruelty. Sobering words from one of our founders. In fact, based on his study of history, Adams estimated that on average, democracy lasts about 250 years, which means that our American version of democratic government doesn't have much longer to survive. And as we survey our civic landscape, it appears that Adams' prophecy may be coming true. Americans are increasingly losing their faith in our government, and for good reason. It seems either unwilling or unable to address the pressing problems of our time. Unprecedented income inequality, stagnant wages, the evisceration of the middle class, crumbling infrastructure, climate change, a pandemic, an epidemic of gun violence, decreasing life expectancy. Need I go on? Now, because I'm something of a political junkie, it's tempting to veer off into a discussion of how big money is poisoning our political system, or how gerrymandering is rigging our political system. But instead, this morning, I want us to look at the bigger picture. And to put this in spiritual terms, I would put it this way. We are replacing a we culture with a me culture. We no longer believe in the great idea of society itself. Or as Margaret Thatcher put it some years ago, there is no such thing as society, only a collection of individuals. We are increasingly opposed to the idea of living together in a society in which we invest in the common good. The core of democracy is about treating each person as having equal worth. It's choosing what is best for everyone, not just yourself. It's about recognizing a common humanity, a common purpose, and a common destiny. However, the public sphere is being consumed by private interest. Democracy is like a garden. It must be continually tended and nurtured, otherwise it will die. When I was growing up in the 60s and 70s in a small town in eastern North Carolina, all of us, kids from the richest families and the poorest families, Black kids and white kids, we attended the same public schools, read books in the same public library, played in the same public park, traveled the same public streets and highways, were provided the same public police and fire protection, and were educated at the same public universities. Despite our varied family incomes and backgrounds, we shared common institutions, common values, and a common culture. Yet increasingly, our world is divided between those who believe in society and those who believe and live a kind of tribalism characterized by a hostility, a violence, a rage that is tearing our social fabric apart. Your kid attends a school without books? That's okay. My kid is getting a quality education. You don't have health insurance? That's okay. I do. Your minimum wage job doesn't allow you to support yourself? That's okay. I'm making a killing. That's not democracy. That's sociopathic. Now, all of us here are all too aware of the political polarization between so-called liberals and so-called conservatives because many of us are caught up in it. We are aware of how social media makes matters worse by creating echo chambers, feeding us beliefs we already believe, interacting only with like-minded people, and keeping out ideas with which we don't agree, and people with whom we have little in common. But the great divide in the body politic goes way beyond the cyber world. Not only do liberals and conservatives differ politically, but increasingly live separately. As never before, liberals and conservatives are less likely to marry or have friends or even neighbors from the other end of the political spectrum. The designation of red states and blue states is based on this reality. But our preferences are much more local than that. Liberals and conservatives systematically favor different kinds of physical environments, even when they live in regions that might appear to be politically mixed. Liberals prefer walkable, ethnically diverse communities, while conservatives gravitate toward areas with larger houses and more private space. Liberals and conservatives tend to decorate their homes differently. Clocks and flags for conservatives, art and maps for liberals. Conservatives tend to favor neater, more orderly workspaces, while liberals tend to work in offices that are less organized and more colorful. Liberals and conservatives tend to shop at different businesses, even banks and grocery stores. For instance, liberals are more likely to shop at Target, Trader Joe's, or Whole Foods, conservatives at Walmart and Sam's Club. They even tend to buy different brands of the same products. Liberals are more likely to buy Rolling Stone magazine, conservatives Southern Living. Liberals are more likely to buy a Honda, conservatives a GMC. Liberals a Cuisinart coffee maker, conservatives a Keurig. Liberals tend to buy the store brand pain reliever, conservatives Bayer aspirin. Liberals buy combat bug spray, conservatives Black Flag. Liberals tend to buy moist pet food, conservatives dry. I'm not making any of this up. It's verified by social statistics. In ways that are more unconscious than conscious, more and more of our personal choices and characteristics express our partisan allegiances. Carrying a tote bag, wearing yoga pants, shopping at Walmart, driving a pickup are all ways of signaling one's tribal membership. As a nation, we are living in separate political, social, and even physical worlds, each becoming more homogeneous within our tribes and more intensely hostile to everyone else. Well, that's the bad news, which seems to be fulfilling John Adams' prophecy about the fate of democracy. But in a few minutes, I want to share with you the good news of how we might save our democracy. But first, please enjoy this musical interlude. Thank you. So I want to share with you some good news of how we might save our democracy. And it's grounded in something we UUs can confidently put our faith in science, and biology to be precise. Now I'm relying on the research of Nicholas Christakis, who teaches social and natural science at Yale. He's published a book entitled Blueprint, The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society, in which he makes the case that natural selection has genetically hardwired us for kindness, love, and cooperation, because these are the very traits which have promoted our survival as a species. In other words, we carry within our genetic code the blueprint, hence the title of his book, for making a good society. Now, Christakis began thinking about this over 25 years ago as a hospice doctor. Death and grief unite us like nothing else, he observes. I've held the hands of countless dying people from all sorts of backgrounds, and I don't think I've met a single person yet who didn't share the same exact aspirations at the end of life: to make amends for mistakes, to be close to loved ones, to tell his or her story to someone who will listen, and to die free of pain. The desire for social connection is so deep that it is here with us until the end. Now, his observation counters the typical interpretation of Darwin's survival of the fittest, which emphasizes competition over cooperation. It also counters the current polarization between conservatives and liberals, which begs the question whether a common American identity is feasible or even desirable anymore. Can you love people in your tribe without hating everyone else? That's the question we have to wrestle with if we're going to save our democracy. Now, according to Christakis' research, we arrive in this world with a genetic blueprint, which affords us with the capacity for love and friendship, allowing us to work together to achieve common goals while minimizing hostility and violence. Now, Christakis has a fascination with shipwrecks because he believes they tell us a lot about how societies come into being and how they fall from grace. During the period of European exploration up to the modern era of navigation, there have been over 6,000 shipwrecks. And the great majority of these, everyone on board went down to a watery grave. The ones which interested Christakis were those that survived, made landfall, and set up camp, usually as a result of good leadership. An intriguing case study is provided by two shipwrecks which occurred at the same time on opposite ends of the same island in the Pacific in 1864. The case is practically a social experiment of how social orders work. One crew, led by a captain who seemed mostly interested in his own survival. They landed on a rocky beach, and the crew had no shoes, a few clothes, a pencil, and some matches. Leaving one weaker man to die, they set out across the island. And along the way, they abandoned other men who were injured or too weak to go on. One man was eaten. 3 were eventually rescued, including the captain. All the lower-ranked seamen died. Now, men from the other ship on the other side of the island stuck together and worked collaboratively from the beginning. Despite some disagreements, there was tremendous loyalty to the group. The captain had been sick when the ship foundered, but the men refused to abandon him and took him along with them on shore. Under his guidance, they built a cabin with nails they forged themselves. Using a Roman recipe, the captain made concrete from seashells and sand. He also crafted chess pieces, dominoes, and a pack of cards, which they had to discard because one of the crew was a sore loser and started fights. And as they were from different nations, they taught each other foreign languages and math. According to the captain's log, their impromptu school equalized them. He writes, "We were alternately the student and the teacher. We achieved a perfect equality among us." The captain proposed that the men vote and choose a head of the family. His duty, specified the captain, was to maintain order and harmony with gentleness and firmness. The men elected the sore loser at cards, and he remained in that position for 2 years of their ordeal. And he and the captain and a third man set sail in a repair dinghy and made it all the way to New Zealand. Then they turned right around and went back to the island to rescue the 2 men who trusted them to return. No group can survive without trust. You cannot have a congregation without trust. You cannot have a country without trust in each other, knowing that we will make mistakes and that we'll have mutinies along the way. But you cannot make it unless you can trust people you barely know. This crew, relying on mutual trust, respect, and cooperation, brought into being a good society. Now, Christakis concedes that evolution has endowed us with a parallel propensity for animosity and violence, which contribute to the collapse of the social order. But living socially, democratically, is the blueprint for organizing a successful society. And we have that blueprint for kindness, altruism, and friendship within us. That's the good news. The spiritual challenge for our democracy is to cultivate and reinforce and nurture this capacity, remembering that the human species has advanced more through cooperation than competition. My grandparents, who were dirt farmers in rural North Carolina, survived the Great Depression, not by living a philosophy of live and let live, but of live and help live. They helped their neighbors bring in the crops, and their neighbors helped them do the same. They delivered one another's babies. When a neighbor was sick, they brought food to the rest of the family. When there was a death, they brought care to the family, and they washed the body of the deceased, and they dug the grave, and they sat up all night with the corpse, a silent vigil to counter the loneliness of death. I once asked my grandfather why he would sit with a dead person throughout the night, knowing that he had to work the next day. He replied, because it's the thing we did. It's the thing we did. If we live simply for me and mine, we end up living the law of the jungle, a war of all against all, and a free market of wolves becomes the slaughter of lambs. But if we take the spiritual journey from me to we can create a civilization. And what is civilization? It's a web of connections, joining people to families, friends, communities, and country, rooted in the recognition of the whole and a companionship with others. Civilization is not natural. It doesn't happen automatically. If it happens, we make it happen. It's the thing we do. A stable and honored system of laws in which no person is above the law, safe streets, secure pensions for workers, quality schools for children, all part of the bargain we strike with each other for civilization. Why do young men die in battle for their country's sake? Why do old people plant trees they will never sit under? Why do we pay taxes for schools we will never attend? Because we are all part of a big, beautiful aspiration expressed in the preamble to the Constitution as we the people. All of us, wherever we are going together. This is it. There is no planet B. There is no alternative. We are all in this together. You, me, us, we, the people. Amen.